Captain Jonah Winters stood in front of the hollow table, eyes fixed on the swirling blue light of the galaxy map. His fingers hovered just above the controls, but he didn't move them. The message had been simple. The Vragna fleet has reached the Outer Rim. Colony Alpha 7 is lost. Proceed with immediate counter-offensive. The orders were clear. His mind, however, wasn't. He turned slowly, his boots echoing against the cold metal deck, to face his crew. Most of them were standing in silence, their faces lit by the pale glow of the holographic displays that filled the bridge. They were all waiting for him to speak, to provide the clarity they sought. Jonah's stomach twisted. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, but the emptiness of the room amplified the gravity of their situation. A single ship. One warship against an enemy fleet that had wiped out countless civilizations. It didn't add up. How could they even hope to win? Captain! Lieutenant Julia Zane's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood near the tactical station, her sharp eyes studying the data scrolling across the display. The Solace is ready for launch, but we're looking at an enemy force twice the size of anything we've faced before. We've got the tech, but we don't have the numbers. Jonah nodded, his expression unwavering. I know. But we don't have the luxury of waiting for backup. The Vragna won't stop until they've annihilated every last one of our colonies. If we don't take action now, there'll be nothing left to protect. He could see the hesitation in Zane's eyes, the same uncertainty reflected in the faces of the rest of the crew. Their fear wasn't unwarranted. The Vragna weren't just a threat, they were a symbol of overwhelming power. Their warships were nightmares of technology and weaponry. And humanity, despite their advances, was still considered a minor player in this galaxy. Yet Jonah knew something they didn't. He'd seen the reports. The Solace, this ship, was a game-changer. A fusion of human ingenuity, military precision, and a newly developed AI system that could make all the difference. It was their only chance. Jonah exhaled and strode to the captain's chair, his hands clenching the armrests. We're going in with everything we have. The Vragna may think they're invincible, but they haven't faced humanity yet. Not like this. The comms officer, Lieutenant Harris, spoke up, breaking the silence. Sir, we're receiving a distress signal from one of our outer colonies, Alpha 7. It's a looped message, but it's bad. They say they're out of time. His voice faltered at the last part, but he quickly regained his composure. Jonah's jaw tightened. He could hear the desperation in Harris's voice, the weight of those words sinking in. Play it. A crackling static filled the bridge, followed by the voice of a colony commander. This is Commander Torres of Alpha 7. We are being overrun. The Vragna are. They are unstoppable. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of weapon fire, followed by eerie silence. Jonah stood motionless, his hands now clenched into fists. Zane walked over, placing a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. They're not waiting anymore. If we don't hit them first, there won't be anyone left to warn. He turned his head, looking her in the eyes. That's why we're launching now. Zane nodded, stepping back to her station, her fingers dancing across the controls. Initiating launch sequence. Solace is on course for the Outer Rim. ETA, 12 hours. Jonah's eyes narrowed as he glanced out the bridge window at the dark expanse of space. The stars shimmered, distant and cold, but their glow only reminded him of how small humanity was in the grand scheme of the universe. They'd never been a force of reckoning. Not until now. He gripped the arms of his chair tighter, forcing his mind into focus. There was no room for fear. There was no room for doubt. Deploy every weapon system we have. And keep the shields at full power. We're not just going in blind, we're going in with a message. Show them humanity can fight. The crew moved with precision, each of them trained for this moment. Every action was measured, every order precise. The Solace was their only chance, and they were about to take it. As the launch sequence continued, Jonah glanced once more at the galaxy map. He traced the route toward Alpha 7, his mind calculating. If they were going to make it in time, they'd need to cut through the Vragna blockade. It wasn't just a battle of weapons. It was a race against time. The countdown on the screen blinked, and Jonah felt the familiar hum of the ship beneath his feet as it prepared to breach the atmosphere. There was no turning back now. "Captain," Zane's voice broke through again. "We've got incoming signals. The Vragna fleet has been spotted at the edge of our path." Jonah's heart rate spiked, but his expression remained calm. "Prepare to engage. We're not running. We're fighting for every world out there." He turned to face the crew. "Humanity's survival is on the line. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." There was no hesitation in the room now. The crew was with him. They would face the Vragna, and they would do it as one. The ship's engines roared to life, the stars blurring into streaks of light as the Solace surged forward. Jonah didn't look back as the ship entered the vast unknown. The Vragna had terrorized the galaxy for too long. It was time for humanity to show them what it truly meant to be a force in the galaxy. As the first shots rang out in the distance, Jonah's words echoed in his mind: "If we don't take action now, there'll be nothing left to protect." Humanity was done running. The tension aboard the Solace was palpable. Captain Jonah Winters stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the view beyond the ship's massive windows. The stars stretched in sharp lines as they rocketed through hyperspace, but Jonah's thoughts were elsewhere. The calm of space outside was deceptive. Inside, the crew buzzed with anxious anticipation. "ETA to Vragna space, 10 minutes," came Lieutenant Zane's voice from across the bridge. Jonah didn't respond. Instead, his gaze flicked to the tactical map that hovered beside her station. The coordinates were clear. The Vragna fleet was positioned just beyond the hyperspace boundary, surrounding Alpha 7's last known location. Jonah's mind raced through their plan, each scenario in vivid detail. One mistake, one misstep, and it could be the end of everything they fought for. He snapped out of his thoughts when Zane spoke again. "Sir, I suggest we perform a series of decoys as we enter their blockade. It's risky, but our shields can't take multiple hits from their capital ships. We need to find a way to make them think we're more than one ship." Jonah turned slowly, meeting her gaze. "How soon can we implement it?" "Within 5 minutes," she said, her voice calm, but there was a fire in her eyes. The crew knew the stakes. "I've already programmed the drones to deploy at strategic intervals. If we time it right, they won't even realize the Solace is the target until we're too close." "Do it," Jonah ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Zane nodded and turned to the console in front of her, fingers flying across the holographic controls. Jonah watched her for a moment before addressing the rest of the bridge crew. "Brace for impact," Jonah said, his tone firm. "The moment we enter their range, we'll be in the fight of our lives." The comms officer, Harris, glanced up from his station. "Captain, the Vragna have positioned themselves in a wide formation. They're trying to create a perimeter. If we try to push through, we'll be surrounded. Our only advantage is speed." Jonah clenched his jaw. The Vragna weren't just invaders. They were tacticians, calculating every move with precision. They had conquered entire sectors with their superior strategy. But they hadn't faced humanity's desperation before. Jonah wasn't about to give up without a fight. "Engage the decoys," he said, his gaze never leaving the tactical display. The bridge hummed as Zane activated the drone sequence. Small, stealthy craft shot out from the Solace, quickly scattering into a wide formation. Each one emitted a faint pulse to mimic the signature of a warship, designed to confuse the Vragna's sensors. Jonah's heart pounded as he watched the first wave of drones move into the Vragna's detection range. "Deploying second wave now," Zane called out. "The Vragna are taking the bait." Jonah nodded. "Keep them distracted. We need their attention diverted long enough for us to slip through." The minutes seemed to drag on, but the calculated silence of space allowed Jonah to think clearly. He scanned the ship's interior, noticing the subtle tremor of anxiety in some of the crew members. They were all experienced, all hardened by previous skirmishes. But this was different. This wasn't just a skirmish. It was war. "Shields up," Jonah ordered. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. I want every cannon system ready for deployment. Zane's voice broke through. Captain, their fleet is shifting. They're reacting to the decoys. Looks like we've caught their attention. Perfect, Jonah muttered under his breath. Just what we need. As the Solace hurtled toward the Vragna perimeter, Jonah's fingers twitched on the edge of his command chair. His crew had their orders. Everyone knew their role. But the uncertainty still lingered. Would the drones buy them enough time? The Vragna's warships were massive, their firepower overwhelming. Even one direct hit could cripple the Solace. Suddenly, Harris's voice rang out. Incoming fire! The words barely registered before the ship lurched, the shield system humming violently in response to the impact. Jonah's grip tightened on the chair, and Zane's eyes flicked to the readings on her screen. They're firing blind, she said, her voice sharp. They've detected the decoy drones and are adjusting. But they're not focusing their fire on us yet. Jonah let out a slow breath. The decoys were working, but only for a moment. The Vragna were far too smart to be distracted for long. We're too close, Zane warned. If we don't make our move now, they'll lock onto us. Jonah nodded. He had no more time for games. Bring us out of hyperspace. Prepare to engage. As Zane executed the command, the ship's massive engines roared, and the stars outside the viewport shifted, blurring into streaks of light. The Vragna fleet loomed ahead, dark, imposing, like a wall of destruction. Jonah's eyes narrowed as the ship exited hyperspace, coming into direct view of the enemy. The Vragna warships were far larger than the Solace. Each one carried enough firepower to obliterate a small fleet. But Jonah had one advantage: the Solace was built for agility. The human warship's design was sleek, its size deceptively small compared to the Vragna ships. It wasn't just a ship, it was a weapon, one capable of moving faster than its enemies could react. Initiating evasive maneuvers, Zane called out, already working the controls. The ship jerked as it dove to the left, narrowly avoiding a deadly salvo from the nearest Vragna ship. Jonah's heart pounded. The Vragna didn't hesitate. They didn't second-guess their shots. Every action was precise, deadly. But so were they. Humanity's resolve was their weapon now. We need to split their focus, Jonah muttered, more to himself than anyone else. If we can take down their command ship, we'll throw them into disarray. Zane's eyes locked onto him, understanding his plan immediately. I've got a clean shot at their flagship. It's risky, but we could take it down with one hit. Do it, Jonah ordered. Give them everything we've got. Zane didn't waste time. The Solace's weapons systems fired in rapid succession, sending a barrage of high-intensity energy blasts toward the Vragna flagship. Jonah could hear the hum of the cannons even through the thick silence of the bridge. Every shot counted. But the Vragna flagship's shields held firm. They're adjusting their shields, Zane said through clenched teeth. It's too strong. We can't break through with our current firepower. Jonah's mind raced. The decoys had bought them precious minutes. But now, they were facing an enemy that was learning fast. And they couldn't afford to waste any more time. We need a new strategy, Jonah said, his voice cold. All hands brace for close combat. The Solace vibrated with the intensity of battle, its hull groaning under the strain of constant fire. Captain Jonah Winters gripped the edge of his command chair as another volley of Vragna plasma blasts slammed into the ship's shields. The lights flickered, and the ship rocked again, sending a shudder through the entire bridge. Shields at 60%, Zane called out from her station, her voice steady despite the chaos. We're holding, but we can't take many more hits like that. Jonah's eyes narrowed, his mind working in overdrive. They had entered the heart of the Vragna fleet, but their position was perilous. Surrounded by massive warships, the Solace was vulnerable despite its superior agility. They had to act quickly, before their enemies closed in for the kill. Status report, Jonah barked. Engines holding steady, Harris, the comms officer, reported. But they're coordinating their fire. They're targeting our engines to cripple us, Captain, It won't be long before they succeed. Jonah's jaw tightened. The Vragna weren't just fighting, they were hunting, methodically dismantling anything in their path. His hand clenched into a fist as he looked out at the dark expanse of enemy warships. We can't let them win. Lieutenant Zane, Jonah said, his voice unwavering. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Get us in close to that flagship, engage their weak points. If we can land one good hit, we might be able to take it down. Zane's eyes flicked over the tactical display, assessing their options. The flagship's heavily shielded, but we might have a shot at their engines. It'll require precision. One mistake, and they'll tear us apart before we can blink. We don't have the luxury of mistakes, Jonah replied. Do it. Without hesitation, Zane's fingers moved across the holographic controls, adjusting the Solace's trajectory. The ship swerved sharply, narrowly dodging a barrage of plasma bolts. Jonah could feel the thrum of the engines as they pushed the ship to its limits, diving between the larger Vragna ships that loomed like shadows in space. Captain, Zane said, her voice calm but urgent. We're in range. Targeting their engines now. Jonah held his breath as the Solace neared the flagship, its massive form becoming more distinct in the viewport. The Vragna warship's sheer size was daunting, but Jonah knew that size didn't always equate to power. Their speed and precision were their greatest assets. Fire! Jonah commanded. The Solace's weapons systems erupted in a symphony of destruction. Energy beams cut through the void, slamming into the Vragna flagship's engines. The explosion was brilliant, a burst of light that lit up the space around them. Direct hit, Zane confirmed. Their engines are damaged, but the flagship's shields are regenerating quickly. Jonah's mind raced. A single shot wasn't enough. They needed more. Target their auxiliary power core, Jonah ordered. We can't afford to let them regroup. The crews sprang into action. Zane adjusted the ship's course, diving toward the heart of the Vragna flagship's structure. The Solace's cannons fired again, the beams lighting up the space in rapid succession. The Vragna flagship retaliated, its own weapons lashing out in a fury of concentrated energy. Another volley slammed into the Solace, rattling the ship once more. Shields at 40%, Zane called. We need to finish this now. Jonah didn't flinch. We will. Incoming Vragna fighters, Harris warned. They're flanking us, Captain. They're sending a swarm. Jonah's mind shifted gears. The Vragna's fighters were smaller, faster, and deadly. They could overwhelm the Solace if they weren't careful. Deploy the drones, Jonah ordered. Activate the pulse disruptors. Take out as many as we can before they get too close. Zane's hands flew over the controls, sending out swarms of drones that darted in front of the ship like a shield. The pulse disruptors fired in rapid bursts, disabling several of the Vragna fighters in an instant. But more kept coming, a relentless tide of enemy craft, each one bristling with weapons. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the battle unfold. They were holding their own, but it was clear that the Vragna weren't going to let up. They had one chance, one shot at turning the tide in their favor. Zane, take us in closer. I want those engines disabled now, Jonah ordered. Zane nodded, her voice tense. Aiming for the auxiliary power core again. The Solace surged forward, the ship's hull creaking under the pressure. Jonah's eyes never left the view ahead, watching the Vragna flagship slowly come into focus. The enemy was closing in from all sides, but Jonah refused to retreat. Not now. Not after everything they'd fought for. Fire! Jonah commanded. The Solace unleashed another barrage of energy blasts, this time targeting the flagship's vulnerable core. The explosion that followed was deafening, a wave of light and heat that rippled through space. For a moment, Jonah thought they had done it. They had broken through. But then the Vragna flagship's shields flared back to life, regenerating almost instantly. The core had been damaged, but not enough. Jonah's frustration boiled over. They were so close. Shields at 20%, Zane reported, her voice strained. We can't keep this up much longer, Captain. Jonah's mind raced, but then something clicked. They were close, yes, but they could do this. Zane, take us directly into their line of fire, Jonah said. We're going to use their own momentum against them. Zane's eyes widened for a split second, then she nodded. Are you sure about this? Jonah met her gaze, his expression resolute. We have no choice. With a hard turn of the helm, the Solace sped directly toward the Vragna flagship. The ship's engines screamed in protest, but Jonah was already anticipating the next move. As they neared the flagship, the Vragna fighters began closing in, their weapons charging. No, Jonah said. Get us through. Zane pulled the ship into a tight roll, slipping just beneath the Vragna flagship's firing arc. The fighters' shots missed by inches, but the flagship's massive guns locked onto the Solace. With an expert maneuver, Zane twisted the ship in a near-impossible evasive turn, bringing the Solace around for one final strike. Fire! Jonah ordered. The ship's weapons erupted in unison, targeting the Vragna flagship's damaged power core. This time, the blast was precise, deadly. The core shattered, and the flagship's shields flickered, collapsing in an explosion that sent shockwaves through the surrounding fleet. Flagship down, Zane breathed, her voice filled with disbelief. Jonah exhaled a sharp breath, but the battle wasn't over. The Vragna fleet was still in full force, their resolve unbroken. We've made a dent, Jonah said, his voice low. But this is just the beginning. Stay sharp. We're not done yet. The Vragna flagship had been destroyed, but Jonah knew that the war was far from over. The Solace was battered, its shields barely holding together, its systems strained to the limit. Yet despite their victories, the vastness of the enemy fleet still loomed ahead. The Vragna had been wounded, but they had not been broken. The battle was shifting, each move now felt like a desperate gamble. Captain! Zane's voice sliced through the tension on the bridge. The Vragna fleet is reorganizing. They're not retreating, they're preparing for a final strike. Jonah's hands tightened on the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white. He had anticipated this. The Vragna were relentless, their strategy never wavering. This wasn't just about victory, it was about annihilation. They had to end it now. How much time do we have? Jonah asked, his voice calm but edged with urgency. Zane's fingers flew across the controls, analyzing the enemy's movements. Maybe 5 minutes before they fully align. Once they do, we're sitting ducks. Then we don't give them that time, Jonah said sharply. Prepare for the final assault. We're going in with everything we have left. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no hesitation. Jonah could see it in their eyes, the same resolve that had brought them this far. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had one thing the Vragna lacked: humanity's ability to adapt, to turn the impossible into reality. All weapons systems online, Zane reported, her voice steady. We've got enough firepower to make it count, but we'll need precision. The Vragna are expecting us to go for another power core strike. We need to keep them guessing. Jonah nodded, his mind already calculating their next move. The Solace wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol, a statement. Humanity had sent their best, and they were going to fight until the last. Deploy the drones again, Jonah ordered. This time, we're going in hard. I want to draw their fire long enough to get close. Zane quickly initiated the sequence, sending the decoy drones into the fray once more. The Vragna fleet responded immediately, their weapons charging, but Jonah's mind was already shifting to the next stage of the plan. We'll go in fast, Jonah said, standing up. And we'll hit them where it hurts. No more playing their game. We make them play ours. The Solace surged forward, its engines roaring with defiance. The Vragna fleet had reorganized into a dense formation, but it wasn't tight enough to prevent the Solace from slipping through the gaps. Jonah's pulse quickened as they neared the heart of the enemy line. We're too close, Zane warned. If we don't hit them in the next few seconds, we'll be swallowed whole. Jonah didn't respond, his focus locked onto the view ahead. He trusted his crew. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future. Every moment counted. "Now," Jonah said. The Solace dove forward, weaving between the massive Vragna warships, narrowly avoiding a direct hit from one of their flagship's point defense cannons. The drones had done their job, keeping the enemy occupied long enough for them to close the distance. "Firing at will," Zane called out. The Solace's cannons erupted in a barrage of fire, each blast directed at the weak points Jonah had memorized during their earlier scans of the Vragna fleet. The ship's guns roared to life, lighting up the blackness of space as they tore into enemy hulls, sending debris scattering. "Direct hits on their command ships," Zane reported, her voice tinged with excitement. "The Vragna are faltering. Their formation is breaking apart." Jonah could see it now, the chaos spreading through the Vragna ranks. The first wave of destruction had done its job. But it was only the beginning. The Vragna were resilient, and they would regroup. Jonah's mind shifted again, planning their next strike. "Prepare the last wave," Jonah said, his voice low and steady. "We hit them with everything we have. This is our only shot." Zane's fingers moved rapidly over the controls, bringing up the remaining power reserves for the final strike. "We've got enough to finish this," she said, her gaze meeting Jonah's. "But it's going to be close." Jonah turned to face the rest of the crew. "We've fought for every inch of this battle. We've bled for this moment. Now we finish it." The final wave was launched. The Solace fired everything left in its arsenal, the last of its torpedoes, the final pulse blasts, all aimed at the heart of the Vragna fleet. The space around them was filled with a cacophony of explosions, light flashing in every direction as the two forces clashed with a fury that shook the very fabric of space. Then silence. Jonah's chest tightened as he waited for the aftermath. The view on the bridge was a mix of fire and debris, the remnants of the battle floating in the vacuum of space. The Vragna fleet was still there, but its cohesion had crumbled. Jonah could feel the tide shifting, the balance of power tipping ever so slightly in their favor. "Damage report," Jonah said, his voice hoarse. Zane didn't hesitate. "We're down to 20% shields. Hull integrity at 65%. We've lost some systems, but we're still operational." Jonah's mind raced, analyzing the damage. The Solace was battered, but it was still alive. That was all that mattered. The Vragna were faltering, their once unyielding formation in disarray. Their command ships were crippled, their support fleet scattered. "We've done it," Harris said, his voice quieter now. "They're retreating." Jonah stood, a wave of exhaustion washing over him, but there was no time to relax. The Vragna might have been retreating, but Jonah knew better than to assume victory. They had struck a blow, but the war was far from over. "Don't celebrate yet," Jonah said, his voice firm. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from finished. We'll need every ship, every ally we can find to finish what we've started." As the crew of the Solace processed the victory, Jonah stood by the viewport, watching the remnants of the Vragna fleet retreat. The stars beyond seemed quiet, almost indifferent to the chaos that had just unfolded. But Jonah knew better. Humanity had proven something today. They weren't just survivors. They were warriors,